Hey, in today's video, I'm going to teach you guys how to spray an orange peel texture. I'm not just going to show you, I'm going to walk you through a little guide here and show you how to change the shape and look of your texture and how to spray it. And we're going to do that right after this. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Kilted Guy videos here on YouTube. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by, because it's my goal here on that Kilted Guy videos to teach you guys how to do your own home improvement projects, to save you money, and to give you pride in workmanship. And we're going to teach you how to do it right. That's our saying here. Before I go too much further, I want to remind you to be sure and check out the description down below. We got some good information in there about free guides, our website, our Amazon store, links to these tools and so on. And if you haven't yet subscribed, be sure and click that subscribe button like you see here, and click on the bell icon if you want to be notified each time we put out a video. We're trying to put out about 2 videos a week, teaching you guys all kinds of tips, tricks, and techniques for your home improvement projects. And a lot of them are drywall, but we also specialize in things like doors, door jambs, things like that. So be sure and stay tuned if you want to learn about those different things. So speaking of learning, let's get right into this. All right, in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to spray an orange peel texture. Now, I just finished spraying. That's why this board might look a little funny. I just finished a video where I taught how to spray knockdown texture. They're 2 different animals, so I scraped it all back off, got my board back ready. We're going to teach you how to spray orange peel on this one. And I've got this board painted green, kind of a greenish gray, because it's going to make the texture stand out better, so you can see what I'm doing better. Now, I covered all these principles about spraying variables in my last video, so I'm going to try and just edit those in here, and we'll go over all that, and then I'll let that video cover that. Hopefully, if I mention knockdown in that video, ignore it. We're doing orange peel this time, so here we go. Okay, in today's video, if you really want to learn how to do this, I would watch this whole video. If you skip right to the part where I do it, you're not going to learn anything, trust me. You need to understand what I'm going to show you here. So let's get into that part here. And what we're going to use today is a professional style hopper. There are various styles of this. This is actually just a little $30 hopper. I've got a link to it in my description. This is a no name basically, and it's turned out to be one of my favorites. I've got about 4 texture hoppers, and this one does a great job. Now, the disadvantage on this one is it has a smaller hopper up here. So like if we compare that to my other style, this is a name brand one here. This is my parts hopper. You can see it's kind of stripped down. This is by Wallboard Tools. I do have another wallboard that is functional. That's why I've used parts off of it. But you can see the difference is the hopper size. And other than that, that's the main difference. And honestly, I really like the way this little cheap thing works. One of the things I like is this stout trigger pull. That one was getting, my others are both getting kind of spongy right here, and that causes this little piston in here to not seat well, and so it drips a lot. Well, this one, you don't have that problem with that stronger spring. Now, might wear your hand out a little bit more, but I'll show you what happens. This part right here is where the air comes out of. It's routed through here, and then it seats against this nozzle tip in here. These are interchangeable. I'll show you on screen here in a minute. There's 3 or 4 sizes of these. There's basically small, medium, and large, and then there's a cone-shaped one we use for spraying the good old popcorn texture. So when you pull the trigger, it pulls this away from that tip, and that allows that air to hit the mud that's near this tip opening, and it breaks it up. And so I'll explain how that affects it here in a minute. But when this gets weak like it does on those, it just doesn't seat well, and so it leaks a lot. So the first thing I want to do is go over the variables that affect how this pattern is going to come out, because you can make this sprayer here spray really tiny drops, medium-sized drops, or really large drops. I've just outlined two two styles. I can't talk today. Two styles here. The fine texture and a heavy texture. Of course, you can find a blend in between there. So what gives you a fine, small drop, tiny texture? That would be a small tip size. Kind of sounds obvious, doesn't it? A higher CFM. By CFM, I'm talking about the cubic feet per minute of air. So the more air you let go through the gun, the more it's going to break it up. And I'll show you more about that, but we do that with this little valve here. You can hear it lets the air through. So the more air I let through, the smaller the drops are. The next thing would be a short trigger pull. As I showed you here, the more you pull it, the further away it gets. Well, the less you pull, the closer it is to the tip, so only a little bit of mud gets in there, it breaks it up finer. If you pull it really far, more mud gets up there, it shoots out bigger drops. And then the final thing would be the thinness of the mud. The thinner the mud, the more it can break it up. Thicker the mud, the less it can break it up. Now you don't want to get it too thick, and I'll show you that in a minute, because it has to gravity flow through there, and if it's too thick, it's just not going to flow. So on the opposite side, if you want a heavy texture, you want a large tip size, a low CFM, just a little bit of air. The less air, the bigger the drops. And you want a long trigger pull and thicker mud. Now that doesn't mean you want all of those. You vary them according to what you want. All right, now when I spray, I mainly adjust a couple things at a time. I don't necessarily adjust everything. Like I can have a small tip size and still get some pretty big drops by having lower air or a longer pull and thicker mud. It just depends kind of what I've got in my bucket and all. So the main things I concentrate on are the CFM. Let's just put a star right here, and the trigger pull. With those two variables right there, you can change this quite a bit. But if you want to change it even more, like even bigger drops, then adjust these other things. But if you just focus on these two things, I'll show you how you can just change a lot with that. Yeah, so for example, today we're not going to change the thickness of the mud. We're not going to change the tip size. So we're really just going to vary these two things and give us three different types of texture. So let's go ahead and get into that. Now I'm sure you're going to wonder how thick the texture should be. That's always a question. How thin should I be and what do I use? Okay, first of all, I'm just using box mud. You can use pretty much whatever you've got on hand because most all of it will work for texture. This is +3. You can use the green label all-purpose, whatever you have. You take your box mud and you thin it down until it's really thin. You can see it pours out of here. I would call this a medium thin, because if you want a fine orange peel, I would go even thinner than that. So there's a whole cup. Try and give you a better idea. You can see, as everybody likes to say, it's kind of like pancake batter. But for a fine orange peel, you actually want it thinner than that, unless you like them really thin pancakes. So let's add a little texture here. I normally just pour it out of the bucket, honestly, but when I'm doing small stuff, I have that dipping cup. But first thing I would mention is, before you just start spraying, find something off to the side, some masking, some plastic, something to test your pattern out on so that you have an idea of what you're going to get, because you need to know if you got these variables adjusted right. I should also point out this adjustment knob on the back here, all this does is stop you from pulling it too far. So if you want to spray a lot, you set this to where you pull this trigger at the maximum and it stops against that. That way you can just hang on and spray. You don't have to adjust with your hand each time. I'm pretty used to it, so I normally just adjust as I go, but that's what that's about. So there's really only two adjustments on the gun. Okay, that just gives us our first pattern. Okay, so that covers all of the variables that affect the look of it. So what I'm going to do is get right into it and show you how I do that. Like I said, I'm only going to vary two things, the trigger pull and the amount of air. I'm going to use the same mud that I used for the knockdown video, I'm just going to use less trigger pull and more air. That's going to break it up more. So that shows that you really don't have to vary too much with things. If you wanted a really fine orange peel, like we're going to say this is fine, you might want to thin your mud down more than I have here, but I can get a pretty fine one even with this thicker mud. So let's go ahead and fill that up and get going. Now I'm running about 35 psi coming out of my air compressor. We adjust the amount of air with this thing. We adjust the trigger pull here. Okay, so for this first one, on the fine one, we're going to do minimal trigger pull, lots of air. Okay, you can see I did accomplish it. It would have been a little bit easier if this was thinner, but I've got another job to spray with this same mud tomorrow, so I don't want to thin it down. That just shows that you can get a pretty fine one even with a slightly thicker mud. Now for the second one, I'm going to pull the trigger a little bit further with a little bit less air. Probably going to be similar on the air because of the thickness of the mud. Now I recommend you normally find a test spot off to the side and test. And if not, just spray your big wall that you're working on and then just scrape it off when you're done and then start over, which is kind of like we did here. So I decided I'm just going to use maximum air flow here and just more trigger pull, and I'll get that medium orange peel. If your tip clogs up because a chunk got down there or something, you can take a wire and poke it in there and kind of break it up, or sometimes you can just put your finger over the end, pull the trigger, and that forces the air to hit your finger, blows back in and blows the chunk away, and a lot of times that'll solve it. Watch out, it may bubble out of here like a hot springs. Okay, you can see I got a little bit bigger drops than over here. So we're going to move on to that one. Now I did forget to explain my pattern. On the last video I explained it. What I normally try and do is an even pattern. I'll try and do about a 50% overlap each time. And then often I go over it 2 to 3 times, and that makes it more even. If you try and do it all in one pass, sometimes it's not as even. I don't recommend the random pattern I see some people doing. Don't just do this kind of all over thing. Either go in circles, you can just go in circles, or do a pattern like I did, but try and go a little bit at a time and build up to what you're looking for instead of trying to get it all at once. Let's move on to the heavy one. Okay, so for this one, I'm basically just going to pull the trigger more. I think I'm going to use the same air pressure. Again, I usually experiment a little bit. After I spray one, especially a repair, I often look it over and try and fill in those light areas so I even it out more, and then it just looks better. And if you're trying to match one, you often want to look over to the side and see if it's matching the way you want. I'm going to do a whole separate video on matching an orange peel texture. I've kind of done one. You can look for that. I'm going to redo it because I think I can do a better job than what I did, but that one actually details it pretty good. Okay, so let me go over these points once more. Don't leave just yet because I want to make sure you got this. To get a light one, light trigger pull, lots of air. Medium, same air, more trigger pull, and more trigger pull. That's basically the most important thing, is the amount of trigger pull. But if you're not getting what you want, look at my chart, adjust those variables, and you'll get it even closer to what you're looking for. And hey, I hope that helped you out. But before you go, look at all these videos I'm going to pop up on the side here. And there's some other related videos. If you'll click on one of them, they'll help you out too. But if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, be sure and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video, everybody. Take care.